Quad 66. This is the first video here that I'm doing on, I want to do a series on black box review. On this video I'm starting with filtering, and one of the things to know about these videos is I'm not intending these videos to be like start to finish, this is how you analyze black box, but what I'm trying to do is fill in some gaps. If you want kind of that start to finish, this is how to analyze black boxes, what a PID controller does, I would highly recommend checking out UAV Tech. And the only reason that my videos exist for this kind of stuff is not that there's UAV Tech does anything wrong, it's just that there's some gap where he's focused a lot on 5-inch, there's a lot of stuff on there, but when we're reviewing this stuff, there's not a lot of this gets subjective, and there's not a lot from these small quads, there's not a lot from 2.5-inch and 3-inch quads, and because this gets subjective, it's hard to compare. It's like hard to know, it's like, am I on the right track, or is this terrible? I don't know. So I'm trying to put some of this stuff out there so at least you can see this is what mine look like, and I think they're pretty good. I mean, they fly well, I'm not burning motors, so I assume they're pretty good, but you can compare, and if your stuff is better, please post it up and show me, and then help me get mine even better, right? But anyways, so I did want to start with filtering. Not any super great reasons to start with filtering other than it kind of starts a thought process of, well, how noisy your quad is determines how much filtering you need, which determines how much latency you have, which determines, and also how much D-term you can use, and so it kind of interacts. With all these videos, I am going to gather them up and put them on my coffee shop. To me that looks like Ko-fi, I don't know, they pronounce it coffee. But if you go to that and check that out, in the shop there's going to be this whole tab with tuning stuff, and you can see some of my prior videos for Betaflight are in there, and then these black box review videos are going to be in there also. So the quad I used on this setup, so this is a 2.5-inch with the Gemfan 2512s, 1103 motors, flying it on TOS, and I set it up with a lot of D-term, so I'm using 50 on the D-term, and also super aggressive on the filters. So with the filters, I took these all the way down to 2. So there used to be 2 sliders here, pushed them all the way to 2. Got rid of one of those sliders by turning off my second low pass, and that takes it off the kind of defaults. That's why you only have one slider. And then experimenting with something, I did add a little notch filter on the D-term, and I'll show you what that did and what that looks like. Other thing I did that you won't see here is I went into the CLI, and I actually narrowed my RPM notch Q, so I went from 500 down to 750. So the larger the number, the tighter it is. I think people are trying to get it down to like 1,000. 1,000 is pretty tight. If you can get it there, you're good to go. And overall, even though this was super aggressive and these weren't brand new props, in fact, this is still my first batch of the Gemfan 2512 props, it still to me looked pretty good. And what do I mean by looking pretty good? So when we look at our data streams, this that I'm highlighting right now, that's our gyro, that's our raw signal. And you can see that when we look at it, it's not a smooth thing. It's got a bunch of this up and down. That up and down stuff, that's the noise. That's the problem. We don't want that. We just want the signal. And so we have to get rid of it, because all this up and down noise, then if we don't get rid of it, it goes into our D-term, which then goes into our PID sum, and if we put it into our PID sum, that's going to create all your problems with your motor heat and just inefficiency. So looking at this purple line, it's pretty hard to just see this all by itself, so then what we want to do is we want to visualize it. And the first way to visualize it is to just see, if you click on this, that'll pop up this little visualization window. And you can plot this a couple different ways, but I think the easiest way to start out is just looking at how much noise do we have at our different frequencies. And you can see where our motor noise is coming in. And this, to me, looks pretty reasonable. Like, we're not getting motor noise up into a bunch of the red. It's kind of confined here. There's not really much reason to think there's huge harmonics, although I didn't log this at high enough frequency to see, are there going to be huge harmonics? I don't think there are. But this, to me, looked pretty reasonable. And how do I know that? I don't, other than if I can pull up examples of what is not reasonable. So this is the same quad but with really, really beat up props. I just was thrashing these props to the point where they started to sound like 5-inch props. And so when we visualize this, you can see some differences in terms of, come on, pull up there. So if we look at our noise distribution, you can see there's just a whole lot more. We're getting a bunch of red here. And so this, to me, probably reasonable. This, not reasonable. So that's just looking at the motor noise. So how does this translate? So the way this translates into what actually affects our PID is the first thing we can do is we can go ahead and say, okay, what does this look like after we filtered it? So after we filtered it, we can see this and we're thinking, okay, this looks great. And it looks great until you realize that your D term, which is a super important term, we use a lot of it, especially in these little quads to get the stability, it amplifies any residual noise that you had. And you can see after we filtered it, we put the D term in, and now the D term brought back all this noise. And the problem with this D term noise is then that, like I said, it's going to go into your PID sum, and that's going to go into your motor key, it's going to ruin your efficiency and things like that. So this, to me, however, still looks pretty reasonable. We do have a little bit of a motor peak here, and we can also visualize this another way. We're going to visualize it now on our scatter plot, where we're going to plot it frequency versus throttle. And so now we get our throttle response curve, and we can see that there's this little peak, this problem band right in here. If we go back over to our bad props, you can see that, let's go to our filtered gyro. We took it down pretty well, but then as we add in our D term, we can see, oh, here's a noise again, and there's a whole bunch of it up in this red, whole bunch of it where it's getting unreasonable. I did throw on this notch filter, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about that, but there was an even bigger peak here before that notch filter. And so when we do this, when we visualize on the scatter plot, you can see just how much red there is. So in terms of like what's reasonable, this to me is pretty reasonable. This to me is probably borderline not so reasonable. My motors were still not getting too hot on this, but I think that this is, you know, if you're seeing this much brightness, this much white, this is probably problematic. And this is even after I threw in that little notch filter. So again, not trying to be comprehensive, but give you a little feel for what is maybe okay versus what's not okay on these little quads. So let's talk about that notch filter really quick. So let's show you what that is. So this goes back to before I beat up props too badly, and we'll show you what the notch filter does and what it doesn't do. I think what it doesn't do is actually probably just as important. So here's before we put that notch filter on it, and you can see we've got this motor peak, and that's what we wanted to get rid of. And sure enough, if we put a notch filter on it and we center it, we got rid of that motor peak, and this actually did pretty well. And if you keep that notch filter tight enough, it's not going to add a whole lot of latency. And now if we visualize it back on our scatter plot, you can see that this now, to me, although this filtering is pretty aggressive, this actually looks great. And you can see that that notch filter helped us a little bit to get rid of this one little problem band. So going back to the original here, you can see our little problem band. Throw the notch filter on it, problem band's gone, and we're good. Where the notch filter, however, is not going to help you is if you have this broad area of noise, because you can see the notch is only going to take out a little bit. And if you try and take that notch out super wide, you're going to start introducing too much latency. So if you really take that notch out really wide, you're going to lose the benefit of trying to get this selective filtering. And so if you're trying to deal with a situation where you've got a lot of noise over a broad range, that notch filter isn't going to help you, versus you can see where it might be a reasonable thing to try if you have this little problem spot. Anyways, that's what I have for this video. Again, it's not intended to be comprehensive. I'm just trying to fill in little gaps. Check out UAV Tech if you want the more comprehensive look at it, and check out the Quad 66 Digital Shop for other videos. Till next time, cheers.